Everybody, welcome to tonight's session. Issues and debates. We're back with another session going over exam questions, some skills, some tips. We've got Melissa, we've got Anne, and we've got a lot in store for you tonight. Some difficult stuff as well. As always, answers in the chat. It's interactive. Let's stay focused and let's do our best tonight. So we're going to start with you, Anne.
Yep. Okay, so any of you who were here last week in the session that we had to finish early because we had a technical hitch will recognise this activity, but we thought we'd include it again because students seem to struggle. So if you can give me 3 aspects Sieber and Stanley outlined in the scientific research process that raise ethical implications in socially sensitive research. So we want 3 things in the chat box, please. Okay, so we had some good answers coming in there. I think Amy came in quite early with 2 of them. There are 4 things altogether. So the wording of the research question, the methodology people are saying, data handling we've got, it's more to do with the interpretation and the application of the findings, how you interpret the data, and also the institutional context, I don't remember seeing that one, but that can introduce all sorts of kind of like power issues there. Okay, but some really, really good questions. They're not named on the specification, Lorcan, but it is really handy they are kind of quite important researchers within this area of socially sensitive research. So, useful for your discussion. So well worth having a look at if you haven't come across them. I expect Laura will either put a link in or put something on for you. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mel now.
Okay, yeah, just picking up on that, a few of mine have been asking me about that today. I think Anne's completely right. Whilst it's not on the spec, it would be quite difficult if a 16-mark question comes up on social sensitivity if you're not necessarily familiar with those researchers. So it's definitely one that you would want to take a little look at before Monday. Okay, quick activity now. We're going to do 3, 2, 1. Hopefully you're super familiar with this. You're going to have 2 minutes to answer these questions that appear on the screen. Please make sure when you send your answers, you just put it all down as one answer. So 3 areas of the specification that you could link to social sensitivity, any areas. 2 research methods that are idiographic, and give me 1 example of alpha bias in research. So have a little go at that one.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, some really strong answers coming in there, particularly for that first one. So lots of different ideas of how we can apply social sensitivity. We've got monotropic theory, which a few of you actually said. Some of you went for role of the father and how that might have implications for the father, but also both the mother in a heterosexual relationship. Cognitive explanations of depression. A lot of you went for things like cognitive explanations of offending as well. That is positive. A few of you went for biological explanations of offending. Obedience research. There's loads of good ones you've gone for there. Just a reminder, when we look at social sensitivity, we're talking about research which has potential implications for a social group. That can be positive, it can be negative, but it implicates a group in a particular way. So yeah, some really nice ones pulled out. A few of you I can see talking about schizophrenia as well there. So genetic explanations of schizophrenia, that's really strong. We have a little look at the next one. So we asked you for 2 research methods that are idiographic. The only thing I would say with some of your answers on this one, a lot of people said interviews. Now, whilst you are correct, we do tend to see interviews are idiographic. This tends to be more with unstructured interviews, which tend to take a little bit longer. People are able to explain their answers and really go off on the topic that they've been given. You've got to be careful if you're too generic and you just say
And then here you've got your example of alpha bias. So some of you put lots of different things, and again, and as long as they're relevant, your examples are fine. So Freud's theory of psychosexual development exaggerates the importance of males. Some people confuse that with beta bias, especially when talking about Freud. But remember, alpha is exaggerating the difference between gender or culture, and beta bias is exaggerating the difference, minimizing the difference. There we go. So on to levels of explanation. Let's have a look if we've got Melissa and Anne back with us. And yes, we have.
Yeah. Don't know what happened, just tipped out again.
That's okay.
Right, this was mine, wasn't it? Levels of explanation. Yeah, so again, last week in the session, it did become apparent that quite a few students were not really aware of what we were talking about when we talked about levels of explanation. And this is why it's very important to be kind of familiar with the specification, especially for the issue, well, for all of it, but in issues and debates, there are a lot of key terms on there that you could be asked questions about. Levels of explanation does link to reductionism. And so the lowest levels of explanation are the most reductionist, and the highest level is the least reductionist, or the most holistic. There was a question, an essay question, a couple of years ago, and had there not been a big clue about reductionism, I think a lot of students wouldn't have known what to do with it. So the lowest level of explanation then considers physiological or biological explanations. Then moving to the middle level, and the little pictures kind of might help here. That's psychological explanations, in particular cognitive and behavioural explanations. So hence the dog and the mouse there. And then the highest level of explanation is the social and cultural explanations, and that is the most holistic level. So just be aware that you could be asked about that within issues and debates section. Okay, so I'm going to head back to Mel again.
Perfect. So this is something I think a lot of students struggle with. I think this is probably one of the most poorly answered questions across paper 3, is when we have essays for issues and debates. And I think the reason being is because it often doesn't lend itself to be as simple as one strength of ideographic or one strength of being nomothetic is this. So we're going to have a little go at this now with a couple of exam questions, and just think about how we might structure it. And then you can go and have a go at this by yourself with some of the other topics. So if we start with this one, discuss the determinism and free will debate in psychology. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that if you do get an issues and debates essay, it might not look this straightforward. It might have an application that can sometimes make it a little bit easier. You've got some AO2 in there, but actually the question might not lend itself to being this obvious too. The best piece of advice we can give you is to try and make sure that you have an essay plan for each of your issues and debates for just a quite straightforward essay question like this, and then you're able to adapt it if a harder one does come up. So this one here, we've got discuss the determinism and free will debate in psychology. Now, if you've got a debate, the first thing that's worth doing with this one is actually outlining, well, what is the debate? You know, we've got a sort of discussion going on here. What is the discussion about behaviour? How are we explaining it? So in this case, what is determinism and what is free will? And actually, we can probably take that a little bit further and show some knowledge on what are the different types of determinism. You know, what different explanations have we got for determinism? If you could pop in the chat for me what types of determinism we've got, that would be good, so I can see some of those coming up. And then it's always really good for each of your issues and debates to have an example of a topic or a piece of psychology or a bit of research that you know about, which has taken a deterministic view or a free will view, and you can bring that in then to use as examples. You could do that for ideographic, you could do it for nomothetic as well. I'm just having a little look now at someone. Yeah, Amani, it looks like you've got all of them. So you've got hard determinism and soft determinism, so you could go down that lens. Hard determinism, you've got no free will at all. Soft determinism, you've got a little bit of free will, but behaviour is largely determined. And then, yeah, definitely we've got biological, psychic, and environmental coming in there, which is really good to see. So this could be a good AO1 suggestion structure. Introduce the debate first. You could even do 1 or 2 sentence introduction. Then tell us what it means to be either side of the debate. And then if you're able to, break down some more of those core concepts that you guys have just mentioned then, and use examples to support each of those. So you might have an example which goes with biological determinism, such as the biological explanation of schizophrenia. And you might apply that to each of your different types of determinism. So you might explain the psychic level or level of explanation. Okay, so this could be a plan for our AO1. When we think about the AO3, what we've really got to do is think about what are the costs and what are the benefits of taking either side of the debate. So the cost, what we
You know,
It's okay. When you're looking at the different debates, a lot of the students say, how do we actually go about evaluating? And that's a fair question, isn't it, Anne? Because it's not really the type of evaluation that you usually have. You don't normally go through your things like strengths and limitations. So when it comes to these, it's a good idea to have a look at the costs and benefit analysis, which was actually something we mentioned last week as well. So when it comes to determinism and free will, just worthwhile in the exam, just jotting a table down like this. Costs of determinism, that's going to be your negative thing that you'll talk about. Costs of free will, same again. And then benefits of each side of the debate are the good things. And that might relate to implications, research, scientific compatibility, etc. So try and have a look at some of these and see if you recognise any of these points. But it's the structure that matters. So, for example, one negative of taking a deterministic view of behaviour is that it's not compatible with the justice system. So, for example, if we were to say, oh, well, anyone who kills anyone or steals anything, it's not their fault, they've been determined by their genes. That's not compatible with people taking responsibility for their behaviour. So to take a deterministic view might be good because of various reasons, but that is essentially a really negative point about that view. On the other hand, which is a really good sentence to use if you're flipping the debate, on the other hand, determinism has been supported by evidence. You've got evidence in your course, but there was a study, I think it's called by Libet or Libet et al.
yes, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they
That's a
asked
good
people,
one, that one.
yeah, they asked, I think randomly, I think about this study all the time because I really believe it's true. So when they asked people to press a button, they found that their mind or their brain had decided to press the button before they consciously reached for the button. And it just showed that actually we're a product of what our brain determines we should do. So really good point there. It's not a big study, is it? Just a tiny little snippet will do. And then for free will, the costs there, the negatives, unfortunately, is that it's not compatible with science. You know, in science, we've got objectivity, break things down into testable hypotheses, and all of that type of stuff. And those that take a free will view of behaviour can't really do that. The benefits of free will, though, are that it does empower people. Mel's just mentioned soft determinism, which is not the same as free will, but kind of in the same realm. If we think you've got free will over your behaviour, then you can do something about your behaviour. You can unlearn your phobia. You can go to CBT and change the way that you think. And if we didn't have any type of free will or control, we wouldn't be able to do any of that, really. So what you would end up there is actually more than you would need for an essay, but it just shows you how to look at these debates.
You can build up the paragraphs, yeah. You know, so you've got a
Exactly.
good paragraph for each. There's plenty there.
Now, if you can follow this type of plan, it works with all of the debates. Slightly different needed for culture and gender bias, but here's another example. Reductionism and holism, same type of question, and our plan's the same. What is the debate? Because most students go, this is what reductionism is, this is what holism is, and there's no emphasis on that debate, and you would be penalised for that in the exam. So what's the debate? What do you know about each? Levels of explanation, you can't do it without them, and that Anne's just talked you through that. And then examples, so you'll know from your course you've got examples of reductionism. Even just the approaches is enough, isn't it? We know we've got humanism for holism, biology for reductionism, you've got different types of reductionism, so there's lots you could talk about there. And then in terms of evaluation, we could just do the same again. We consider the cost benefit analysis. So for example, anyone that takes a reductionist view of anything, it's not wrong to take a reductionist view. If you're reductionist and right, you've hit the jackpot, haven't you? So if you can find the one thing that causes behaviour, that's like groundbreaking stuff. But unfortunately, most people taking a reductionist view, they tend to oversimplify behaviours. If you're only looking at one of those levels of explanation I went through before, then we're not considering all of the other things either. But by breaking things down into bits and bobs, we do have implications for treatment. We wouldn't have antidepressants, SSRIs, we wouldn't have OCD treatments if we didn't break the condition down and reduce it to its lowest level. Holism, say on the other end, unfortunately, the cost of taking a holistic view is it's not compatible with the aims of science, just like we said earlier. But the benefit of doing so, regardless of that, is that it does take the whole person into account. It doesn't try and break you up, which is what humanism said not to do either. So I've seen in the chat saying, is this just like strengths and limitations? It is, but this is just a good plan because the structure for these issues and debate questions is different. Amy's asking who did that study that I mentioned before. Libet. I'll spell it because I don't know how to pronounce it. Libet. I'll try and put it on Instagram later on. And Ella said Wolp's a good example of reductionism. Yeah, spot on. Ella said teacher tells us to put 3 points with counters. Yeah, people always say how many evaluation points. Ideally, as many as you've got time for, but they've got to be good. I'd say
It's
the
quality, isn't it?
yeah, the
Quality, not quantity.
better your points are, the less you can write. So if you do 3 really good points with some elaboration and maybe a counter, then that's a much better essay than someone who's done 8 evaluation points, but none of them are any good or show any skill. Anyway, here we go. Sorry, Anne, I rabbit on. Over
Oh,
to
it's
Anne.
okay. It's fine. It's really important stuff because people were saying they were worried about the essays. I seem
I'm
to be
just
one
gonna
that's
let.
picking
Sorry,
on the some obscure bits of the specification here. So again, thinking of this is another issues and debates key term. This is something that's on this spec. The scientific emphasis on causal explanations, misread by students a couple of years ago, read it as casual explanations and wrote all sorts of weird answers. What does that term mean? The scientific emphasis on causal explanations. What are they wanting you to write about there?
Well, people answer that. Someone's asked, Yellow Beans asked, can you talk about each approach as an AO3 for issues and debates? They're more like your applications, like if you're asked to refer to topics. So you could use them as
Yep.
examples to support a point, but there's no need to be going on about approaches unless you're asked to refer to some topic.
Some great answers coming up here. Ellie in there straight away with cause and effect explanations. As long as you read it correctly, then that should be your clue. It's looking at cause and effect. It is kind of establishing cause and effect. That's what science wants to do. Looking at, manipulating the IV, looking for the effects on the dependent variable. All this stuff on there. They can ask a question about it. Okay, so I'm going back to Mel now.
You're going to stick with me for now.
All right.
Here's another question. Explain what's meant by the nature-nurture debate. Now, we've said several times already, this isn't asking you what's nature and what's nurture, it's asking you what the debate is. So, you all probably know that nature is all your prenatal stuff, it's your biology, nature's all your experience, but it's the skill. So to answer that, you're going to have to spot that your focus should be on debate.
And the relative contribution of each is kind of the sort of phrase really, and not talk about the nature debate and the nurture debate. As students often want to do. Sorry,
which are just like,
in
that's fine. And they're just like slips of the pen, aren't we? That we see every year, but they do cost you marks. And you might be thinking, oh, it's only 2 marks, but they really are 2 marks, aren't they? As we've just been talking about before, you're expected to be precise. So talk about the debate, the idea that, in psychology, we discuss, and we have been discussing for a long time, what is more influential on behaviour. Is it our biology and nature, or is it our nature and experience? And if it's both, which one maybe contributes more than the other? That's the debate. And that alone will get 2 marks, and that's without lengthy descriptions about what nature and nurture is, and that's without any examples either. Although you could give an example, but only to support your answer.
Okay, so here we've got devil's advocates, because one way of kind of expanding on and elaborating on your evaluation points is to include a counter argument, is to come back with something from the other side, which is the idea of playing devil's advocate. But it needs to be kind of linked to what you've said. But it means that if you start off with something that's a strength, then you need to flip it over and suggest why that could also be a limitation, why it could be a problem. So have a go at this one. So we've got nomothetic approaches to understanding behaviour are usually compatible with the aims of science because they attempt to establish laws about behaviour using experimental research and or quantitative data. Then you kind of have your however, and how are you going to flip that over? Okay, what would you say in response to that? Okay. Some good answers coming in. They all come in all the time. Yep. So I like Sophia's reference to the uniqueness of an individual. Stacey's coming with it, lose sight of the unique individual experiences, because you are kind of lumping everybody together and saying this is the average, this is like what the average person would do, but then you lose the uniqueness, the unique responses, the unique behaviors, the individual differences. And I like that kind of line there. And a good phrase, which we haven't actually included in our answer, but nomothetic approaches break the behavior into the smaller testable components, but you're not looking at the whole thing, and you're not looking at the understanding of unique individuals. You're just trying to establish laws of what the average person will do. So some really good counters coming in there, and again, people using using your knowledge of your topics as well is really good to do there. Yeah, just because 1%, I like that 1% chance of getting schizophrenia, it shows nothing about the actual experience of having it and what that actually means. From Unknown Gamer, I like that one. Okay, so I don't know, is Mel back on, or is it? Yeah.
Just us now. So we've got some quick multiple choice questions. Let's see who knows their specification. So which one, A, B, C or D, is your ethical guidelines? And remember, these are just the guidelines. These aren't necessarily the issues that researchers are going to face. These are generally the things that the researchers will do about the issues or to minimise the issues. But we've got most people putting C, which, yeah, that seems to be the common answer, and you would be correct. So consent, you've got to do that to make sure that people know what they're about to do. And deception's a really good example as to why these aren't necessarily good things, are they? Because students always say to me every year, how can deception be a guideline when you're not meant to do it? So it's avoiding that deception, minimising it where possible. There's plenty more ethical guidelines in the world, but these are the ones that you've got to know and can be named in your exam. And if you do sociology, you'll know lots more as well. All right, number 2. Which of these are a feature of an ideographic approach? A, B, C or D? Put your answer in the chat. We've got some A's straight away. Think about what Melissa was saying earlier. Faith's asking, is debriefing a way of dealing with issues? Yeah, you're right. Yep. It doesn't make up for the fact of deceiving people. It helps, but it doesn't completely counteract it. And also you've got the issue of if you lie to them all the way through the study and then you do a debrief, but they're too traumatised to listen to your debrief, well, technically they've not been debriefed. All right, we've got A as a common answer here. Let's see. You are right. Well done. So generally thinking open questions, interviews, case studies, all the stuff that gets that rich, detailed data, that's the stuff that focuses on the individual. All right, question 3. What's encouraged when Indigenous people study their own culture? Hopefully you recognise these terms on the board. They're all on the spec.
People often get them mixed up, though. Oh, imposed ethic, though, it isn't actually on the spec, is it?
Oh, no, you may talk about it, though, in relation to
Yeah.
one of the other, yeah.
You can't be asked specifically about it. But you can on the others.
But Leona, we'll briefly explain it, because it's a handy term, isn't it?
It's a good term.
I personally can't talk about the strange situation without it. EMIC as well, that's a good one, Cardia. Okay, so we've got some answers. Let's see if you're right, and it's C. So when we study, I'll explain ethic and EMIC, because I think this might help. So if someone imposes their ethics, think Mary Ainsworth, American woman, looking at what attachment is all over the world, but actually she's imposing her American beliefs and values. So she's imposing her ethics. Oh, everyone used to think I've misspelled ethics when I used to say that. And so she's imposing that Western ideal. And that's why you might talk about A and B together. No, an EMIC, which is what Kari's put in the chat, EMIC is good. Imposing your ethics is not. An EMIC approach is good, and that's where you might look at that culture's experience and norms and values and traditions and differences before you start researching them.
Yeah, so you'd measure attachment using their kind of ways that they view attachment or see a securely attached child behaving. That would be an EMIC approach.
Yeah. So you probably would all say, oh, it's strange situations, culture bias, because in Japan they raise the kids differently, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you were taking an EMIC approach, you change a strange situation so that the measurement of attachment was according to the Japanese culture. And that kind of is why we would encourage people in their own culture and researchers from their own culture to research them. I'm not the best person to go and study Japanese attachment, but if there's a psychologist in Japan who is, then that's much better. And that's kind of what we're doing here. They can look at it in a culturally relative way.
Van Eisendorn isn't an EMIC. Van Eisendorn is comparing cultures using the strange situations. So it's actually been an imposed ethic on some of those cultures.
Yeah. So they didn't do it themselves, but they've inherited a tool that imposed ethics and didn't change it. All right, number 4. Which approach can be used to demonstrate both nature and nurture? A, B, C, or D? We've got some D. Confused potatoes said D. Ella's D. Dan's D. Mercutio's D. All right, let's see. Well done. That's great stuff. Does anyone know why, though? Anyone know why that could demonstrate both nature and nurture? Amy's saying schema's nature is neurons, I assume. Doesn't necessarily answer the question, but yeah, schema could be related.
Yeah, because we kind of, schemas are culturally specific, aren't they? So it must be nurture, mustn't it?
But then, yeah, Ella, you've added something there that our internal processes could be have some type of biology and origin.
Yeah.
You could all, Skylar's mentioned a bit later on in the theory that they've used the brain scans and etc. to understand cognitions. All right, yeah, good. Right, let's pass you back to Anne.
Okay, so we're going to do some question breakdowns. So if you look at this question, using your knowledge of gender bias, explain the difference between alpha bias and beta bias. Refer to at least 2 topics you've studied in your answer. So what should you spot in this question before writing your answer? What is it wanting you to do? What are the key things? If you were looking at that, what would you be underlining? What would you be highlighting? Or yeah, you've been asked to explain the difference between alpha bias and beta bias rather than just simply explaining what they are. And within that answer, you do need to be referring to 2 topics within the psychology specification. Okay, just quickly, what is the difference between alpha and beta bias?
said this at the start, didn't we, as well?
What is the difference between them?
Isabel says alpha's maximising and beta's
Yeah,
minimising.
one's exaggerating and one's minimising. Yeah, which is correct. And so, what examples could you use there? So yeah, beta social influence of the studies with the males and assuming it was the same for females, weren't we? Okay, so let's say we've got a model answer here, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, so there we are. So alpha bias theories which exaggerate the difference, whereas, remember that whereas is really important in a difference. A beta bias occurs when they're minimized or ignored, often by assuming that findings of studies of males apply equally to females. And then we've got our examples. So we've got Freud's theory of the Oedipus complex, and also evolutionary explanations for behaviour. They both tend to exaggerate the importance of males and that females are inferior, develop a weaker superego. And then some of you said the social influence research, which was fine for beta bias, but we've got the fight or flight response. Remember that was kind of developed using studies with animal studies that were all males, and important differences were ignored until females were studied, and that kind of tend and befriend response was identified. So yeah, you've got, and it is good that there's many different answers, and and it's drawing on examples from things that you know and things that you'll remember. As long as you've got an example for each, that's absolutely great. Okay, so I'm going to pass back to Laura.
Okay. I think we kind of almost went off on this about before, didn't we? Describe one example of ethnocentrism in psychology. What should you spot in this question? And we always ask this because it seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do it. And especially if you're knackered in the exam and you've been revising and you're worried, you just see keywords sometimes, don't you? Because you are in fight or flight. Describe. Yeah, you've got to spot that command word. So we're not after any evaluation. What else? The example. Good. We're not just after what is ethnocentrism. We need an example, and only the example will be credited. Well done. And your example might be something off your topic, or it might be a real life example. As long as it actually does demonstrate ethnocentrism, that's fine. And of course, it's worth 4 marks, so we want some detail in the answer. So Amy saying strange situation. Yeah, you could have that for the reasons we chatted before. Any others? Ash, Dan, you're saying Ash. Pop it in the chat why you think that would be ethnocentrism. Murky Show, I can see you saying you think it's like a man's world in answer to a question, but I didn't see the original question, so if you want to pop it back in, I can answer that. Milligrams, only male Americans. Yeah, and it's not even just that you only use men, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The issue is that we've got a Western view of attachment or obedience to conformity, whatever it is, and the assumption is that they are the benchmark for that behaviour, and then that's compared to everybody else in the world. So that's where we've got those imposed ethics. Let's look at a model answer. We're whizzing through these model answers, but you can have a look at them, and you can actually download this PowerPoint if you want to go through them as well. So Ainsworth strange situation, which we mentioned before, and you can just see there the detail for a 4-mark answer. The temptation is to just say it really quick and move on to another question, but we've got key terms, we've got detail, we've focused on ethnocentrism as well. And you can see there, especially in that second paragraph, when cultural variations were noted, they tended to be misinterpreted. We've given an example relevant to that study, because this is the one example of this answer chose to focus on. And then we've got into it, and you can see I've mentioned imposed ethic there as well. So that whole answer is one example, but with elaboration and some key terms, and you'll be up there getting the top bad marks for that. Okay, let's look at another one or two of these.
Okay, so if we have a look at this one then, so always, with these questions, it makes sense to read the question first and then look at the scenario. We always kind of recommend that for application questions. So explain how the nature-nurture debate relates to the item above. So if you read that and then read the item, then you can start to be thinking about it. So Sam's mother is always telling him he's very irritable, just like his father, and will never be able to control his temper. So what are the key things that you need to spot in that question that you need to do? Yeah, it is an AO2 question, isn't it? Explain how it refers to the item. So how does the nature-nurture debate relate to what Sam's mother is telling him? Yep, so you need to do that. You need to explain it, how it relates to the STEM. So you need to show some knowledge of the nature-nurture debate, but it needs to be related to what Sam's mother's saying about his behaviour. And both sides of the debate. And some of you have started to answer it as well. So saying he's like his father, very irritable. How could that be? That could be either, couldn't it? So it could be inherited, which would be the nature side of the debate. How could we explain it in terms of nurture, though? Yeah, social learning theory is actually, if he's lived with his dad, he's observed and imitated his behaviour. And the reality is it perhaps is a mixture of the two, as is often the case.
And bear in mind as well, this is all the marks are for AO2, aren't they, Anne, in a question like this?
Yes.
This isn't explain the nature-nurture debate full stop and then relate it, in which case you would do both jobs. This is just AO2. So anything that's generic about nature-nurture debate will not be credited. So it's all got to be wrapped up in the scenario, in Sam and his experience.
Yeah.
And have we got a model? Let's see. Oh, there's an example.
Yep. So here we go. The nature side of the debate would suggest that Sam's irritability and bad temper are inherited from his father due to his genes. The nurture debate, you could have a whereas there as well, couldn't you? The nurture side would suggest that his irritability and bad temper are learnt behaviours, learnt through observation and imitation of his father, who'd be a key role model. So within, you can see that the debate is in there, but it's illustrated through, applying it to Sam. And you can do that quite concisely rather than writing a long explanation of the debate and then going on to apply it to Sam. You still get the marks, but you've just wasted a lot of time. You want to do it as quickly and concisely as possible.
And I think I understand, because sometimes you feel like, well, I can't talk about this without talking about this bit first, but you absolutely can. If they haven't asked you for something, what are you doing it for? That's what I always think.
You run out of time somewhere else.
Yeah. Have we just had this on a same scenario but different question? And this is really good about issues and debates, because you can often take a little scenario or a news item or a piece of research and apply all the debates to it, can't you? So same as the one earlier, we've got Sam, but this time we're asking, referring to at least two types of determinism in your answer, explain why Sam's mother's statement can be viewed as being deterministic. What should you spot? Same things as earlier, I'm hoping you identify. So you've got to apply it. It's not asking you to identify and describe and define determinism or types. It's all wrapped up in AO2. And all you really need to do is just go through all your types of determinism, like a little checklist, and see which ones do apply and which ones you feel confident in writing about. And before you know it, you'll have your 4 marks, as long as you're not just throwing Sam's name in here and there, and if you're not just basically paraphrasing the whole STEM.
And that there's at least 2 different types as well.
2 different types. So Nick's saying environmental lives with his dad, so will imitate the behaviour. So yeah, environmental determinism. That's good. Had a say in bio and environmental. Yeah, you just need your application. So you spotted them, but we've got to wrap it in that application, remember.
And hard determinism, he'll never be able to control his temper.
So quite a few you could choose, really, with the questions, at least 2. So you might choose, you could definitely easily get 4 marks with just 2. But you might, for a bit of safety, do a third one if you wanted. Just remember, it's all A02, use your specialist terms, and you'll be fine. And I suppose one of the big things with issues and debates is not to get confused at them, is there? So sometimes when you talk about determinism, students slip accidentally into social sensitivity or into reductionism and vice versa. So just watch out for that as well.
I'm just looking at Sophie as I'm unsure why you can assume he lives with his dad. It's a good point, that. So I suppose you could say, well, if he has lived with his dad, then it could be a learned behaviour. Because you're right, Sophie, it didn't actually say that.
Yeah, good point. You can't, I mean, you can go a little bit beyond the STEM, can't you? But you obviously can't just make up your own stuff. So if you wrap it in a context that could make it relevant, that would be okay. So we've covered quite a bit. There are more questions on this PowerPoint if you wanted to go away and download it. But we've got one more live session with you on Thursday. This Thursday, 6 o'clock, we'll be here for an hour. There'll be 3 or 4 of us, and it's a live. So the only thing we're doing is an exam clinic. Sorry, I know the line. What I mean is it's an exam clinic live. So just on paper 3, we'll answer all your questions on issues and debates, on all the optional topics as well. If you've got questions you want us to think about in advance, then let us know. We can do. If you want to see a model answer for something, let us know, and we can put that up as well, maybe during the session. But come along Thursday. It's our last session of the academic year, and let's finish it with a bang and help you get through your last hurdle for your last exam, which is in 6 days. So, a good chunk of time. We're not at panic stations. You've got a good chunk of time. And remember, it's skill over content. Doesn't matter how much you know. If you can't do anything with it, that's that, isn't it? Any words of advice, Anne, before we finish off?
No, not. I don't think. I think just the obvious, really, isn't it? Revise, 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 and go and look at all those little words on the specification, because the questions have to be based on the wording of the specification. So you need to make sure that you recognise all those terms and what they're asking you for.
Exactly, yeah. Like levels of explanation.
Yes.
Yeah, we have had a 16 marker on it before.
Yeah, so they did give a clue by making reference to reductionism or holism.
Yeah.
Or I think a lot of students could be in big trouble.
All right then. We are on Instagram as well at Tutor to Your Sake. So if you have got questions we haven't answered tonight, or if you've just got other questions or want to run something by us, post on our feed or send a message, and we'll try and help you as much as you can, so you're not on your own. All right, we will see you on Thursday.
See you on Thursday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we'll say thanks to Melissa as well. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. See ya.